Have you ever wondered what the success of having a billion-dollar company would feel like? For Brian Murray, he was surprised by the emptiness of it. Are you trying to control all of your success, maybe lacking fulfillment, joy, freedom, and peace? Brian was the same way. He's an introverted, analytical person, and he used to try to control all the wrong things. But his journey of ultimately success helped him figure out who he was, and it shaped his mindset, and it gave him the courage to do some different things. And he eventually found freedom from that process, from the growth. And he talks about why he thinks he's here, why he thinks we are here. And I think it might surprise you coming from someone that has had all the success in the world and runs $1 billion business. Check it out. Hello and welcome to Purpose Matrix. I am very excited for today's guest, Mr. Brian Murray. Brian, how are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I appreciate your time coming on because you're in demand. You've had a lot of success, which it appears as you've had success in different things and grown from those. You love to create and write on those topics too. So first, Washington Street Properties, fastest growing companies awards, Executive of the Year awards. Co-founder of Open Door Capital, now over well over $1 billion company. And you've taken those lessons and you really have written about those, not with the intention to sell books, but to just have an impact and help people. Author of Crushing It, The Multifamily Millionaire, and most recently, Welcome to My Gardener, which I'm really excited to get into that and some of those topics more because they're just really interesting to me. So Brian, thanks again so much. I want to start with, that was my introduction, but who are you, Brian?
Well, I appreciate your kind introduction. And it's interesting because, a lot of people might answer that question by, repeating back some of your career or your accomplishments, but that's really not how I feel anymore. And it's one of the things I've learned, but I'm a person who's just trying to be his best self. I'm trying to be a good father. I'm trying to help others and make whatever difference I can and, be, the best person I can, my best self and my true self. And, that's a lifelong project that I'm working on.
So I want to hear more about that because, I'll start with your writing career because you had a lot of success in the real estate and private equity world, like very, very significant. And you taught about that. But I want to talk not about how to have success in business necessarily, but what were like the major lessons that you took away from that phase of your career where you're building a business and just, growing yourself, challenging yourself? Like, tell me about who you were before and after that time period maybe of your life.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I grew a lot. I learned that any limitations we might put on ourselves are self-imposed. I learned that, we're all capable of accomplishing things that we maybe didn't think we were capable of. But I also learned that we're not defined by our vocation. We're not defined by, our professional achievements. And I learned that it's absolutely critical to find joy and fulfillment in the process and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and not expect that your life is going to change in the future based on some attainment that you're striving for.
Do you think that, I've had this debate with others, but did you have to have the success to figure out that the success didn't really change you at your core? Like, do we have to go through that? Like if someone doesn't, like they think they need career success or whatever that is, and they tie their identity to that, but then they're not successful. Like did you need to be successful to figure out that that's not what you needed?
I think it helped. I don't know how open I was to hearing messages like that before it happened. I really don't. I did find that at the pinnacle of the growth of my, businesses, that I just found that I wasn't experiencing any type of joy from that. And in particular, when my real estate portfolio achieved I was managing over $1 billion in real estate, and it cleared that threshold. That's obviously a really big number. And I realized it meant absolutely nothing to me. And I didn't take any joy or pleasure. And I realized that, there were so many things that were so much more important to me. And some of them I had been neglecting. And it was at a time in my life where I had already started to make some changes, and it just accelerated that.
And I kind of skipped the part of your story where before that you were in the private equity world as an employee, I think, but you were really just, like 100 mile an hour, 100 hours a week, like hardcore working. And then obviously the next phase where you're building your own businesses. And just, I think there's so much value in, like, sometimes I just think, you might be listening to this and saying, okay, I don't need to go after this success, but you can't not do that. Like for me, 10 years ago, like I started thinking about mission, and it was help others succeed. And how wrong that was, because the goal is not success. The goal, in my opinion, is what you talked about in the introduction, which is becoming the best version of yourself, becoming as excellent as you can become as a whole person, not success for the sake of success. So as you kind of grew through this first phase, but you reached this, let's say, $1 billion mark, and you're like, okay, that didn't solve the problems. It didn't fix me. I think you were growing through that process, and that led to some growth, but like the outcome didn't matter. You kind of shifted what you're doing, but also your mindset. I think this ultimately led to, by the way, the first part is all your success led to the book Crushing It in Apartments. But then you shifted to this phase where you eventually wrote your other book on really getting alignment on who you are, your identity, your priorities. So tell me about that journey over the last, let's say, 5 years or so, if that's the right timeline, and how you've grown in a different way from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to clarify, I don't think there's anything wrong with striving for success or achievements. I don't think that, I think what people need to be careful of and cautious about is, what are the reasons they're doing that, and to be aware of the sacrifices they might be making, and to make those consciously. And if that's something that they choose to do, then, they can do that. But I think the problem is that we tend to fall into this mode of, going 100 miles an hour and not really step back and have that perspective where we can see what those sacrifices we're making actually are. And we might be rationalizing it with some outcome that is, maybe not, well thought out or misplaced. And a lot of people are driven by insecurities. Maybe they think that a certain level of achievement will change how they're viewed. The people will care for them more or give them the respect that they didn't get. But it's very important, I think, to find fulfillment and joy in the journey. And I did that to some extent. I did find that at a certain point, I took more joy from creating jobs and taking perhaps an older, dangerous property and making it a safe, nice place for people to live and work. And finding some things beyond yourself that you can feel good about. So, but at a certain point, I just realized that, the business part of my journey I was not finding the level of fulfillment that I had hoped for. I did enjoy writing because that was just a vehicle by which I could take everything that I'd learned, both good and bad, and lessons, and share those with other people who had aspirations to do what I did. And it's just a very efficient way to reach a lot of people and share the messages. And I try to deliver those messages in a way that when someone reads a book that I write, they feel like they've sat down with me and had a long conversation. Because I don't have enough time to mentor as many people as I would like. But if you put everything you've learned into a book, then everyone who reads it can learn everything that you might share if you were to have an individual conversation. I don't think there was any one thing that was a turning point. I think there were a variety of things that happened in the last 5 years. That's a good timeline, because it was about 5 years ago that I shifted all of my reading away from more business oriented readings to personal growth, and became very interested in spirituality and adopted spiritual practices. And I had different events that affected me. I was in a very bad car accident that I realized could easily have ended my life. I went on a trek in the Himalayas that was very meaningful to me. It got me out of my day-to-day and out of my head, and gave me some peace and allowed me to gain some perspective and accelerate my growth. And so there were quite a few things that all added up that I just found myself really changing my priorities.
Well, so there's a lot there, and it's fantastic. But I think, by the way, I agree. Like getting success there's nothing wrong with that. And honestly, if you aspire to have success because of the growth you'll have from that process, that's not bad either. But if you tie your identity to the outcome you get, that is a dangerous path to go down, in my opinion. That's the part that, you will get the outcome. Honestly, the outcome you want that you talked about is joy and fulfillment. And if you pursue the right things, which is becoming the best version of yourself, being present, you will get joy and fulfillment. But if you go after success, especially just business success, that's a dangerous path, dangerous identity. And you talked about a lot of different things. One thing that you talked about the Nepal and Himalayan trip, right? The base of Mount Everest, and getting out of the day-to-day. And you talk about this in your book, but just, I assume when you're out of the day-to-day, you can just be present. And you talk about it a little bit. I don't want to say too much, but to the ability to be happy, to have joy, to have peace, you have to be present. Eckhart Tolle talks about it. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but tell me more about that chapter and just staying present in the garden. I'll come back to this, maybe even set up the garden in general. Welcome to My Garden, the book, because this is a powerful framework that you have here. So tell me about that, and then the power of being present too.
Sure. The book, Welcome to My Garden, the idea for that book actually came while I was on the trek to Everest Base Camp. And the thought I had at the time was, wow, I've learned so much. I've made so many mistakes. I have a lot of regrets. And, I wish I had figured these things out sooner. And one of the reasons I wish I had figured it out sooner was because I have kids, and I wish I'd been able to impart those lessons to my kids at an earlier age. But on the trek, I realized it wasn't too late. My kids are young adults, but that doesn't mean I can't take what I've learned and still pass it along. So that was very motivating for me. And so when I got back from the trip, I immediately started working on that book. And it's basically a book of life lessons that is written directly to my kids, and has touched other people as well. And I'm grateful for that. In terms of being present, this is the challenge in today's world. Is we have so many distractions, and we're constantly ruminating on the past. We're worried about the future, and we have so many distractions that we're not actually fully present and aware of all the miracles all around us every day, and really giving attention to that person right in front of you that you're speaking with, giving attention to nature, giving attention to all the little things that can bring you such joy, because we really are surrounded by miracles everywhere. Personally, I find that being in nature is very important for me to unwind, to eliminate some of those distractions. And I love animals. I love nature. And so, being on a trek in the Himalayas, the sights and sounds were just, all the whole experience being in that spiritual culture and just, beautiful, beautiful setting. And it really was a great opportunity to not be, consumed by electronics and screen time. And, I had some wonderful companions that I made, lifelong friendships with. And, I think it can be difficult for us to get out of that everyday grind and, gain that perspective. And that particular trip was really useful for me and having some realizations. And when I came back, I made some pretty significant life changes. You
hit on a couple of things. And one thing I talk about is like, in different ways, and I'll bring this back to your message, but you hit two things here. So like, I over the last few weeks came up with like the challenges, the purpose matrix is how do you become the best version of yourself? How do you become excellent at the most important areas of life? Getting clear on who you are. But to set it up, we're all broken in different ways. And we're all feeling broken. We're not perfect. We're human. But some of the things, so broken, Brian, means busyness, regret, obsessions, right? Money, power, wealth, things like that. Control with a K, by the way. And if you're trying to change that, you're just trying to control too much. That's what I say. Ego, and we need help. And you talk about a lot of these things in your book. And the busyness you just talked about, but also like there's this idea like extreme ownership, right? We've heard of this before. And I think extreme ownership is accurate, but on who you are, not controlling people, situations, and outcomes. And I think you're in the business world, you're trying, like, especially as a business owner and a business leader, you're constantly trying to control, especially if you're going after $1 billion, you're trying to control the things you can. And there's influence. I'm not saying that, but you're trying to control everything. And man, that is versus we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to become a better company. So it's really important to understand extreme ownership versus control, and what you control, which is who you are, and what you don't control. And I think to bring it back to being present, like to separate from the day to day. If you're a business leader, a business owner, aspiring business owner, leader, leading people in a team anywhere in the corporate world, whatever it might be, like finding time to separate and get away from that and get out of the day to day, which is what's Brian talking about, I think is so critical. I don't know. I mean, how do you think about like this idea of ownership, control? Like, tell me more about your thought process on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one way that we do that as business people, and it's usually not consciously, but I think we almost assume a role or persona that is best suited in our judgment to be successful within a given situation, right? Or within those circumstances. And so I think what can happen is that drive to control and to get the outcomes that you're committed to can draw things out of you that are not always healthy. I think that it is very challenging to be your true self and stay centered when you have enormous pressures all around you and you might be immersed in a culture like, for instance, a lot of my business experiences in the real estate world. There's a lot of very aggressive people and people who are looking to further their own interests that are not necessarily, going to be conducting themselves the best way. And so what I found is, that sort of leads to, maybe aggravating some hypervigilance that I already had, that's not serving me well, but it can within a business context, it can actually, some of those things can, serve those purposes, even if they're not aligned with who you want to be or you are at your core.
Brian had he became a way better business leader, business owner, real estate, whatever you want to say it. And he wrote a book about it. And he didn't write a book to sell copies of books. He wrote a book to get it down so people could use that, because there was demand for his time and questions. And then as he's went on this journey over the last 5 years, he's like, well, I'm going to write these lessons down for my kids. And one thing I want to say is that if you're thinking about a book, if it feels overwhelming, maybe it's just start the process and write one letter to your kids that they might read in 5, 10, 15 years from now. But I think the power of writing and creating, you talk about that, I think is really important. But I want to come back to, this discussion of control, but I think it ties to, one of your chapters is seeds are planted in the dark. And you might not know, I think what that means is seeds are planted, plant the seeds, but what happens next? Tell me more about that concept, because I think this is really the premise of the book in a lot of ways.
Well, there's actually some different directions I could go with that, but I think that you alluded to this earlier, but I think we become too attached to outcomes, and it's very challenging. But I think that I've had a major mindset shift in this area, where I really believe things unfold in a divine order as they were intended to. And you're really not doing yourself any favors by evaluating yourself or judging yourself based on outcomes. You can make the best decisions possible. You can do everything right, and things might not turn out the way you expected, and you might feel like you're a failure. And I would challenge that. I think that what we need to focus on is, doing what feels right and what we believe is right at the moment and at that time. And then, there is some level of letting go. And that's very challenging for people who've been deeply immersed in the business world, because like you said, you're working on specific scorecards that how things are measured. And you can wrap that right up in your identity. And if it's wrapped up in your identity and you don't get the outcome that you want, then that can destroy you. That's just, that's one line of thought. I could take your introduction there in about 10 different directions.
But so. I think it's so important, because to me, there's an amazing freedom with understanding what you control and what you don't. And if so honestly, in the last week, we had a discussion with one of my coworkers, and there's things in the field, things aren't going right, shockingly, right? We have problems, we have issues, we have challenges going on. But if we get caught up in trying to control exactly what happens versus, hey, we can only control, we can control the company we want to become and how we act. And then individually, but only at an individual level, I should say. But individually, for myself, how do I handle that situation? I have to be completely content. I'm at peace with how I approach that. And that's how I talk to the employee, the team member about it. I was like, how did you handle the situation? Did you do everything you can? Because it's so freeing to let that go. By the way, outcomes, they're just worldly feedback to us to say, hey, maybe we adjust and adapt next time, but let's do the best thing we can. So I kind of have a question for you as you've shifted from the prior to 5 years ago to now. I think part of growth, there's, the people you talk about, you need people to support you. You're reading, you're immersing yourself in education, you're reading books. But I also think there's an element of action where if we set goals, whether they're outcome-based goals or not, right? But if we set goals that we pursue becoming the best version of ourselves, action and taking action is a part of that process of growth. So now that you're in a kind of a different phase, you've grown yourself. How do you approach putting things into action and goals when you're trying to shift out of that in a way almost? I'm curious how you frame that now.
So that's a great question. I think that I have established some routines and habits that help me a lot. One of my highest priorities right now is really learning to really listen closely to my intuition and not necessarily approach all my decisions and goal settings the way I did in the past, which was much more structured and maybe, I might put them in a spreadsheet, or I might have a timeline. And, I really try to do things a lot more by how they feel. Does it feel right? And that is not an easy transition to make. But I also recognize that I do believe that a great deal of the things I accomplished in the business world were a result of some level of intuition as well. And I'm trying to learn to more consciously tap into that and shift in terms of, trying to be more conscious of the messages that are sent to me, both through my intuition and just in the world in general. And I'm much more, and I'm in a much better position to notice the little synchronicities and the little things that happen that I believe are, the universe is kind of pointing each of us in the direction that, we need to go. I think most of us miss a lot of the signs and signals that we get on a day-to-day basis. But I take that pretty seriously, and I try to do the best I can. And I try to I've adopted a number of different practices that I feel make me more open to that and have helped.
And I think, I've heard this, but I don't know if it's the exact phrase, like habits are better than goals. Look at what you're doing today, your routine, like your disciplines. I think those are so much more powerful a lot of times than your goals. And, like you said, following your intuition, like I'm really just so first of all, as a recovering engineer, so it sounds like we have some similar like background and analytical, problems probably, but, I'm looking at like the adventure of life. Like what are you talk about signals and messages and like just being present and like paying attention, and it's like lean into that. And I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know, so just how we got connected, right? I reached out several months ago, and you just kind of saw something, you just went with your gut, I think. And then I saw your response, and I'm like, I don't know what this means. I don't know where this goes, but we're going to lean in. And then, by the way, this morning, my sign falls. I was telling Brian before, my backdrop. So if you're on YouTube watching, my sign falls down, and there are editors, you won't even notice because they're going to do such a great job. But I just rolled with it. Like, okay, like it is what it is. Like, I'm not going to control and fix and change all these things. So anyway, there's super small things to big things that I think we can get, maybe consumed with. So I appreciate that kind of context and thought process, because I was really just curious how you made that shift over the course of time.
Also, just to add to that, I find that I'm a lot more content with a much more simple life, right? So I will, I'll take great joy in an encounter with one of my horses, or with a view, or different things I find on a day-to-day basis, where in the past, I think I was almost like, I had to seek out like these, I had to always be like taking trips somewhere, or like doing something extraordinary, or, Instagram worthy. And I don't really feel that way anymore. So it takes, I guess in terms of goals, like my goals, I think are more, I guess some people would say they're more modest. But to me, I find them more fulfilling.
I love that. And I think that's a long journey and process to be able to be content with that, right? Because you might have to go, like, if you're thinking that, can I go do that now? I think lean into that, but also there might be a process you're going through. As you said, like things happen for a reason. So maybe it ties to, and I don't know if this is, counter to that or not, because you're talking about being outside, you talk about not being alone. You said, hey, the garden is not meant to be tended alone. So tell me more about that and the importance of, living this life with other people and how you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're all divine creations, and I think we all come from the same source, and, in my view, we're meant to be in this world to be of service to others, and not on an island. I'm a very introverted person by nature. So, that's part of why, books appeal to me, to communicate with the rest of the world and reach a lot of people. I have a lot of, I get a lot from solitude, but I also try to make a point to stay in contact with loved ones and, foster healthy relationships and, make sure that I'm doing things that I feel are making a difference and giving back in any way that I can.
So you said you're an introvert, and you talked about the book or the books being a mechanism. But I think also, as you wrote Welcome to My Garden for your kids to read, you were debating, does this become a book? Do I publish this? Right. So all of a sudden, this introverted, like, I'm doing this for my kids to teach them and help them, avoid some of the mistakes that you maybe made or regrets you have, which maybe I might come back to that. But now it's out there. Like, you're communicating to the world. Like, if you want to find out about Brian Murray, go check out the book. And he talks about, his challenges, his struggles, and what he went through and how he developed this really mindset, and just really how he's become who he is. So tell me about the challenge of being an introvert, but kind of being vulnerable and authentic with the world, really.
Yeah. I mean, when I first started writing it, I had no intention of publishing it. But I did let friends know that I was working on it. And I had more than one person ask if I'd be willing to let them read it, because they thought they could benefit from it. And I just came to realize that even if it touched one person and made a difference in their lives, I felt like I would be being selfish by keeping that to myself. I knew it's not going to be the type of book that's going to be like a bestseller or make me money. I wanted to do it because I wanted to share lessons that others could benefit from, specifically my kids. But once I realized it might be able to help some other people, or somebody might glean something that made their lives a little better, that was pretty much it. Like, I don't love sharing that level of intimacy, but I also feel like, it takes strength to be vulnerable. And I think that that's something I wanted to embody. And wouldn't feel good about myself if I felt like I poured my creative energies into something that could benefit some people and I didn't share it because I didn't want to be vulnerable.
It's really interesting because I had this like internal battle as I launched the podcast, and why am I doing this? I think it can be helpful to people, but then it's like, who am I? Like, what am I claiming I know? Or like, I don't have this all figured out. But also, like, there's this, like, what will people think of me? And what got me over it is like, what will people say? Like, I don't belong on this stage. All these limiting beliefs you talk, like, I had all that stuff. But what got me, like, but what if it helps one person? Like, what if it just, like, maybe, am I thinking about the people that might criticize me, which is my ego, by the way. That's my own internal problem, is that's my ego. There's real courage in being vulnerable. And I had to get over, but what if I can help one person? What if I can help one or two people, or help one person in a dramatic way? And even like, it will have released a couple of weeks ago as of when this releases, but there's a discussion or a solo episode I do where I'm like, am I really going to talk about that? Am I really going to open up? And there's just all these limiting beliefs and just what will people think? It's like, you know what? I don't think, like, this isn't going to go viral, but who maybe there's a person that needs to hear this. So I think for the listener, like, if you've been thinking about or trying to discern, like, there's this thing you want to do, and especially if what people think might be holding you back, what people might think of you, because they're probably thinking of themselves, not you. Do that thing, like, step into it and like move in that direction. Like that, if there's a plea to the listeners, if there's something that you feel strongly about, passionate about, because Brian, what you just said is, I don't want to go back and say, I wish I would have tried that. I wish I would have done that. Like, so, I fear regret, not failure, a little bit. And I want to talk about regrets a little bit, because you talk in your book about regrets, mistakes. Like, that's why you wrote the book in the first place, kind of like to maybe help your kids avoid those. And we all have those things. And I think these things are okay. But I'm almost, as I was preparing for this, there's like the small regrets, the small things, but then there's like the big regrets, or I think my read was you have like small regrets. You've made mistakes, you made failures, but like, do you regret in general the path and like what you've done and like at a high level? Like, how do you feel about just this whole discussion or topic?
I guess I can't say I don't have regrets, but I am not a big person to sort of wallow in that space. I don't think it's constructive. I think that, it's all we can do is our best at any given point in time. So if we wish we had done things differently, maybe we can incorporate those lessons into our decisions moving forward. I don't think it's really particularly fruitful to live in those regrets and in the past. So I'm not, is there things that I would do differently if I had the opportunity to do that? Probably, but I also have been very blessed, and I, even with all the mistakes I've made and the regrets that I have a lot to be grateful for. So, I don't focus on that very much.
Yeah. And I think like the book, just if I put myself in your kids' shoes, like if they have access to that book, that doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes or have regrets. It's just, hey, here's some things that you can like, okay, maybe these won't be mistakes or regrets, but these other things will. By the way, maybe they'll read the book, they won't listen to you, and they'll try them anyway and then make mistakes and say, oh, like he was right. He did. Well, I mean, I don't listen well. Like I probably learn, I read it and then I go make mistakes. Like, well, if I just listened the first time, it might have gone better. But that's honestly how we learn and grow, I think.
Yeah. It's very, very difficult to fully internalize lessons from a book. I mean, as an author, I try to communicate things in the best way I can, make them relatable, use stories, ask hypothetical questions, draw people in. But the reality is that, maybe 1% to 2% of a book might really sink in with a reader, and people really are going to learn the most on their own. But it also sometimes helps in other ways. It helps people to realize that, hey, maybe other people make mistakes as well. And, there's not something wrong with me just because I do that, or, so there's other benefits, but I do feel like we all carry a little piece of every book that we read forward with us. And some books make more impact than others. And sometimes specific books resonate with specific people in very special ways. Hopefully, my book does that for somebody.
Yeah, well, I think it does. And Brian, I want to, maybe close with first of all, the last chapter of your book, which kind of brings it together to, right, a life of continual cultivation. And it just ties back to what you've talked about at the very beginning when I asked who you are, and like just becoming, like the goal is to become, you said it a little bit different, but just becoming the best you can be, and the true, like authentically who you are too. Like just, and I think trying to learn, like building our self-awareness of who we are and become the best version that we can be, I think is so powerful. I want to ask Brian kind of a closing questions. If you step back and reflect, think about what you've done, the impact you've had on people through business, right? Like not the success you've had, but the impact you've had on people, the impact you've had with your different books, the lessons you've learned, the lessons you've taught. Step back and reflect. How does what you do, how does it make you feel?
It's always rewarding if someone reaches out, or I find out that something that I did impacted somebody in a positive way. I feel really good about that. But to be honest, I really don't think about that. I really don't think about, I don't dwell in the past. I have a life now that's very, very different. I operate a sanctuary for rescued horses, and I have some rescued dogs and cats, and I try to focus on making an impact in my day-to-day life. And well, I'm grateful for a lot of the experiences I've had, and I'm grateful that I've touched some people in different ways. It's not something I like contemplate particularly often. So
I love that. And I think, so first of all, the word that comes to mind as you share that is just, humility and contentment with really who you've become over the course of time through just all these different phases of life and lessons and the things that you've gone through to kind of help you become who you are today. You're having a great impact with your message, with, in the real estate world. Like, for sure, check out his book if you're into real estate. Crush It in apartments and commercial real estate, which he 10 years ago, I think, probably wrote this. It's sold a ton of copies. Check out, if you want like the next level, the next kind of phase discussion, check out Welcome to My Garden. Really powerful lessons. And Brian, I just want to thank you for, bringing your wisdom. You don't do a lot of podcast appearances, a lot of shows, so I really, really appreciate it. And for sharing with us and the impact you're having. Is there anywhere specific? I know your answer because I appreciate your humility. And actually, I was going to say that you can just tell you've gone through these phases of life, whatever they are, however you want to frame that up, to where you can just be content, and you can be humble, and you can be you're just comfortable with who you are. So you don't want to necessarily, you're not doing this for promotion for any purpose. You told me that. And I can feel that. But if someone does want to find out more about you, where can we send them?
I still maintain a LinkedIn account and an Instagram account. It's at Crushing It Brian. It's from the title of my first real estate book. So people can find me there. My sanctuary is called Freedom Hollow. And so people can find that they can find Freedom Hollow and if you see my videos of my horses and things like that. And Phil, I also want to thank you, because I think this message that you're putting out there and in your podcasts, and I think it's really important. And I'm really grateful that you're giving this of yourself and putting yourself out there and doing it. And I'm sure that your listeners have a lot of gratitude for that.
I appreciate that comment, Brian, but more importantly, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for having an impact on our listeners, on the people you've had an impact on, and just really, becoming who you have become. So I appreciate it, Brian. For the Purpose Matrix, signing off.